Coming up on Locked On Lightning, is this the end of the road for the Lightning playoff hopes? We get into that today. Coming up, all that and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on today's episode. And I just want to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150. If your team wins, visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. And we're getting started today by kind of talking about the honest truth, the cold hard truth with this team. We'll get into that today, as well as Nikita Kucherov, the one of the bright stars from, or really the bright points of this team's season this year, making his fifth All-Star team. We get into that. Talking about more about his chances for winning the Hart Trophy. We get into that as well. And later on, we'll discuss, even though, the Lightning have struggled this year and it's starting to look with every bleak performance as if maybe their chances of making the playoffs is getting less and less possible. We still have to talk about, is it possible, though, to improve this team? We get into that to wrap up the show. But before we get into any of that, I just want to remind you to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel. If you want to reach out to the show, reach out to me, go ahead on Twitter at DankyDank, DENKYD8NK. I love hearing from all of you. Or you could just comment below this video and join in on the conversation. So we're starting off with Nikita Kucherov, because I think before we get into some really unpleasant conversation here with this team, about this team rather, we need to talk about the positives with this team, and mainly all season long that has been Nikita Kucherov. Kuch has just been really one of the consistent bright points for this Tampa Bay Lightning team. He leads the entire NHL as of tonight with 63 points, and he is second in the league in goals at 27, only 3 behind Austin Matthews. And it's cool, it's great that he made the All-Star team, like I said, his 5th selection. But really the end goal, if the Lightning don't win a cup, and I'm sure a lot of players feel like this, especially if they if they don't feel like they have a chance to win the cup, which once you get into the playoffs, obviously anything could happen at that point. But I think that at this point in the season, as we kind of spoke about in the first couple of months of the season, Kuch still has a very strong case, I believe, for MVP. I think that I've seen this a lot with a lot of Oiler fans, especially when the Lightning played the Oilers earlier this year. I had the conversation, who's better, him or McDavid, and a lot of Oiler fans, or what I assumed were Oiler fans, were saying that, what are you, crazy? Connor McDavid is the best player in the league by far. Yeah, that's true, but that doesn't necessarily make him the best player for this season. And I know that might be a little bit puzzling to some, but it is possible. And we see it every year in the NHL, more times than not, where you look at really the Hart players, their Hart Trophy winners every year. I think we could all agree that really, sometimes the best player doesn't win, or the best player isn't exactly, the MVP of his team. I think if the Lightning make the playoffs, I think that that will significantly help Nikita Kucherov's chances at winning the award. I think if they miss the playoffs, that will definitely hurt his chances, because I think those who determine who wins will definitely look at Kuch and take him into in consideration and say, well, listen, did Kucherov do anything significant like that helped his team? Yeah, he put up the stats, but at the end of the day, was he the most valuable player to his team? Yeah, but was he outstanding? Was his performance more outstanding than those around the league? So I think that is what really a lot of the players on this Lightning team should kind of view it as. And I'm sure they want to see him win the Hart Trophy. I think that you need to they need to look at it that way, as if we want this guy to win the MVP, we got to play better. And I think that's something that this team should rally around. You look at the last couple of years, and I think this is a good way to kind of look at it. I would say probably the last 8 or so. And you go down the list of players that won the Hart Trophy, and you got to ask yourself, was that player necessarily the best player in the NHL? Like I said, I mean, there's no dispute that Connor McDavid is the best player on the planet, but given that he was out for 2 months, and you kind of, granted, yeah, he will get his stats, like I said at the time, but and maybe I'm being biased here. I also feel like at the end of the year, the stats will align, just because of McDavid is just scores a ton of points in such a short amount of time too. But you look at the Taylor Hall Hart Trophy from 17-18 when he was with the Devils. Was he necessarily the best player in the league? Probably not. And that's kind of the thing that sucks about it when you look at the Hart Trophy conversation. I think that at the end of the day, it's so subjective, because, if you look at other sports, sometimes they go purely off stats, like baseball, for example. I think really kind of stays true to that. And the NBA somewhat too, I think to a degree, but I think in the NHL, it's, McDavid. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not taking anything away from, we're not having the conversation of, at the end of the day, who's better in the world. Is it Kucherov or McDavid? It's 100% McDavid. But I just think that really at the end of the day, and this is an unfortunate thing that works against Kuch, is that a lot of people, including me, look at this award as McDavid's award to lose. I think that him being out for those 2 months, those 2 weeks, and I believe it was October, maybe the end of October towards November, I think that helped Kucherov get into the conversation, especially with the hot start that he has had. But I think that really, at the end of the day, it's going to be a lot tighter towards the end of the year than what we hope. I think that really Kuch is going to have to do something similar to the last time he won the Hart Trophy back in 19, when he just lit the world on fire and played phenomenal and put up 120 points. So I really think it's going to have to be something crazy, to where they're going to have to give Kuch the award. But at the same time, it's one of those things where I also think people are going to try and spin it, especially the people that don't necessarily believe or don't really watch Kucherov on a nightly basis. They're going to probably look at it and say, well, the Lightning aren't really playing that well. Stamkos is, doing his thing here and there. They have some players that could score, but at the end of the day, and this is just how I think they're going to interpret it. His uptick in stats is that, well, really that Lightning offense goes through Nikita Kucherov, and that's true, it does. But the same could be said for any top scorer on any team. You look at all those years of Alexander Ovechkin in Washington. You look at Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. You look even at Patrick Kane in Chicago. But definitely you could look at Connor McDavid as well as that 1 year with Leon Draisaitl and say the same exact thing. So I think that really what it comes down to is that, it's like I said, I think it's more so, unfortunately, it's turned into a popularity award. I think that though that you know, really, like I said, I think what it comes down to is that coach is going to have to really put up some crazy numbers at the end of the year in order to really put himself separate from Connor McDavid. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. There's still a lot of hockey left to be played. I mean, the Lightning making the playoffs would certainly help his case for the award at the end of the year. And coming up in just a bit, we're going to talk about some cold hard truth. We're in the first week of January. The Lightning are just they keep they keep turning their wheels, and we don't see much progress on a nightly basis. We kind of talk about how this team is taking step backs more times than not. We get into possibly the hardest truth that we'll have to accept this season with this Lightning team in just a bit. But first, I want to talk about our friends over at the Sleeper app. Now it's almost the halfway point of the season, Lightning fans, and the Lightning are up and down, and like I said, they've been turning their wheels more times than not. We've talked about on this show how really they have to pick it back up right after a loss instead of just getting back on the horse and all that. But regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you could win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy contests. Cooch is playing phenomenal. So, you definitely got to put a bet on him. And I think I would say I would probably say Nick Paul. I would say probably he's definitely a sure thing when you want to make your picks on the Sleeper app. And you could pick those two guys to record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus, minus, or more in a given game. So use the promo code Locked On NHL. You'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code Locked On NHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. You could also catch us on our YouTube channel. Go ahead and comment below this video. How you feeling about the Lightning? Realistic chances of really them making the playoffs, because that's really what it's come down to with this team. We've gone, unfortunately, from where is this team going to finish in the top three in the division to now, are they going to be able to make the playoffs? And that's really the thing that's really been frustrating all year long. Is, we came into the season with such high hopes, or maybe we kind of lulled ourselves into this repetitive expectation, which rightfully so we should have, to where this team is talented enough, or at least we think on paper that this team is talented enough to go and make the playoffs on a yearly basis. But like I said, the last couple of years, especially when the Lightning have gone on and signed these big extensions, which I get in the end, when the cap reaches a certain point, those deals are going to look like absolute steals. But at the same time, you're kind of putting yourself against the wall to where you're not going to be able to improve in the short term. And that's the thing that has really, really crippled the Lightning over the last couple of years. They not have really been able to do anything to continue to improve. And I think that's really what's happened, where on the other hand, on the same time, you're looking at Florida, you're looking at Detroit. I've said it over the last couple of seasons that those teams are getting better and better every year. They're young. They're bringing in new pieces here and there. They have a ton of cap space to do so. And then you also look at the rest of the division. I mean, the conference. You got the Devils. You got the Capitals, who I'm still surprised that they're still in the conversation. But you got the Buffalo Sabres as well, who I'm surprised they're actually out of the conversation. The Flyers as well, who have bounced back in a big way compared to last season. So teams have gotten better, and the Lightning have kind of stayed stagnant. And that's what we're seeing this year. And now the Lightning right now, as of tonight, are are a point out of the second wild card spot. And the Devils are a very good team. The Flyers are a very good team. Those are the two teams that they really have to focus on staying close to at this point in time, because Flyers have been good all year. I fully expect them to continue to play well. The Devils are a good team. I continue, barring some catastrophic goalie situation that may arise in New Jersey, I firmly believe that they are going to continue to play well. You look at even at the division, the Maple Leafs are a sure thing for the playoffs. The Florida Panthers have now moved into the second spot in the division. The Bruins are, I think we could agree, barring some injury issues or bad luck or whatever the case may be, that team is probably going to win the division. So, there's no room for the Lightning right now other than possibly the second wild card spot. And now at this point in time, even though, yes, it is the first week of January and we have 3-4 months to really dial it in, which really the Lightning have not consistently done throughout the course of the year, you kind of have to start to make peace with the idea of the Lightning may not make the playoffs this year. And that's a crazy thing to think about, considering what this team has done over the last 4 seasons, what they have been able to accomplish in that time, 2 Stanley Cups, playoff appearances in all 4 seasons, all deep playoff runs, except for last year, where, a disappointing end to where I thought they were really starting to come together there at the end of that series against Toronto. But yeah, I mean, this isn't something that really should be surprising to Tampa Bay Lightning fans, given everything that we have discussed over the last couple of seasons, especially within the last year, really, with this Lightning team. And you really have to ask yourself, who is the blame? And at the same time, how can we what can we do to make it better? And really, the options, and we'll get into more of that, are very limited with this Lightning team. We'll get into that at the end of the show. But really, when you look at this team and you look at what they have on paper, what they have up in Syracuse, and you throw that with their cap space, really, there's not much room that for this team to get better, or other than really just to find something deep down to play better. And it goes back to the old thing that I have constantly said on this show, is that this team, for some whatever reason, and this dates back to even when they won their last cup, they kind of have had this, and if you really want to put blame, I mean, you could put it on the coach, you could put it on Coop, you could put it on this core group of guys. Really what it comes down to is that this team, really, it almost seems as though when they lose a game, they somewhat, it's not a regular, it's not a regular pick me up into the next game. It's kind of like you're trying to reinvent the wheel after a loss, where good teams don't do that. They're able to just bounce back right away. And that's not something that we have been able to see from the Lightning consistently. We'll see it here and there, and then they'll absolutely lay an egg or just be non-existent. And, we spoke about it on the last episode, how really, it's almost a game of sacrifices with this team when it comes to their performance, because really what it comes down to is that, especially to start the game, you kind of have to do a trade-off. It's either play well in the first period and just not show up in the second, or vice versa. And really, that's not the sign of a good hockey team. And I'm not going to open up the can of worms here on the show, and if you guys want to in the comments, go ahead and do that, because I would love to hear both sides of it. I'm not going to sit here and say that it's a leadership thing, but I think that at the end of the day, if you're going to lay it at someone's feet, you're going to have to lay it at Cooper and Stamkos, because Stamkos, at the end of the day, he's the captain. He speaks for Cooper in that locker room when Cooper's not around. And really, when this team just, it like I said, when they lose a game and they try to figure out how to bounce back from that, it's almost as if they're trying to rediscover fire. And that's an issue. And that's really the reason why that this team is where they are. I mean, there's other reasons why, which I've I have really in detail described on this podcast numerous times. But it's really something that has been frustrating, and it's really been something that has been creeping up on this team for a couple of seasons now, slowly but gradually, and really that I think that if this team is really serious about making the playoffs, that's really something that they're going to have to examine if they haven't spoken about already. I haven't heard anything. We haven't heard anything about it in the press about any player coming forward and saying, other than the fact that it's frustrating. But at the same time, to a certain and I get it, the secrecy of hockey and how guys want to keep stuff in the locker room and between players, and that's fine. But at the same time, you got to come out and acknowledge it at some point. And we haven't done that. And it all comes down to accountability. I think once guys start to be accountable for the lack of performance, then maybe we could kind of start to turn the page on that. But until then, I don't really see anything turning around for this Lightning team. So really, I think that at the end of the day, we're going to have to start to make terms with the fact that this team may not be in the playoffs come May. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. Do you still think that there's time for this Lightning team? I mean, when you look at the rest of the division as well as the rest of the conference, I mean, how can you sit there with a plain face and say that with confidence that this team is going to make the playoffs? I don't know how you can. You're a better person than me. So coming up in just a little bit, we're going to wrap things up. We're going to talk about, can this team possibly improve at the trade deadline or in any other facet this season? We talk about that in just a bit. But first, I'm going to wrap things up with our friends over at FanDuel. Now, listen, the NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There are so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. So wrapping things up, I just want to thank everybody, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. And I want to especially thank the everydayers, you, the listener or the watcher that has been with us every single day. For those of you that are young, that are young in your viewership with us, go ahead and subscribe. And hit that notification button, because as soon as the newest episode drops, you will be notified. So yeah, a little bit of a heavy conversation to be had on the show, something that we have honestly not had here on this podcast really ever. The actual reality of the Lightning possibly not making the playoffs. And it's one of those things where I never really thought I was going to say it this soon. If you've been a listener of this podcast for the last couple of seasons, I've been warning you over and over and over again, especially with the way that this team has played at certain times, that the other teams, not only in the division, but in the conference, are getting better. They're younger, they're faster, they have deeper pockets, and that, coupled with the Lightning making all these long-term signings, which I get it. You got to pay your guys now, especially with the cap going up. So you're kind of getting them for a bargain. I get that. That's fine. But at the same time, like I said, you're putting yourself up against a wall that you're not going to be able to wiggle away from. And we've seen it. And we're seeing it right now with this team. We saw it last year when the Lightning really needed a replacement for Jan Ruda. And how did they address that? They brought in Hayden Fleury. And yeah, Hayden Fleury has played very well this year, but last year he was abysmal. And then the counter to that was Nick Perbix, who, was lightning in a pan, was a flash in a pan, excuse me. But at the same time, I mean, he really hasn't done much since really those couple of months in which he really wowed everybody that watches this team. And that's one of the main issues on this team. I mean, there's other things that we could get into with the depth, with the idea that, really this team can't they really can't get creative with some things. They, on top of that, also have really not made good deals, kind of traded away a lot of draft picks. And I get it, that has paid dividends for them, at the deadline. Getting Nick Paul most recently was a big time one. Um, Contrary to some listeners or some people commenting out there, I really like Tanner Janelle. I think that he is what the Lightning need him to be right now. He's not going to score 30. He's not going to score 30 goals for you. He might get 15 if he goes on a hot streak, but it is what it is at this point. Don't blame him. Blame the guy who traded for him. That's Julian Brees-Boss. Julian Brees-Boss really um, got a little bit cocky, I think. He really struck gold a couple of times with the Coleman trade, the Goodrow trade, um, getting Paul, getting Hagel, and that's all great. But at the same time, when you're making those trades and you're still trying to compete and be a cup contender, not only be a cup contender, but win the Stanley Cup, you also have to manage your assets. And it almost kind of feels like now at the time where you need to be more aggressive, you're being cheap, and that's really your fault. It's not like a situation where Brees-Boss is coming into a situation where the previous GM, Steve Yzerman, left him without assets. He really did the opposite with that. And really, I think I kind of hinted at it over the summer. I said, Brees-Boss and his little deals here and there, he's really done a good job. But at the same time, when you look at this team, this has Steve Yzerman's paw prints all over it. And it's really interesting now, or it's really going to be interesting to see going forward, what kind of moves Brees-Boss makes to sustain that winning, and to not only sustain that winning, but to also build towards the future, because Stamkos, Kuch, and Hedman are not going to be around forever, and you're going to need to help Hagel and Paul and Sorelli, that next group of Lightning core players. You're really going to need to help them by surround them with good players, and he hasn't really done that by trading first round picks. I get it here and there, but you got to be smart about it. He also hasn't really done a good job of stacking the farm system. Jack Finley, a high pick from a couple of years ago, he's really just disappeared at this point. I know he hasn't really been the guy that we would have wanted him to be, but at the same time, I hate to do this, but you look at the Stevie Y era, getting Coach late, Point, the list goes on of guys that he was able to pick up relatively with late picks. And, I honestly, I think it's something that we kind of have to look at in that regard. But at the same time, I get it. It's not fair. You picked up what Stevie Y did with his organization was just insane on another level. And it kind of looks like he's doing that in Detroit. The other way that I think that this team could possibly only improve, and I know this is going to be blasphemous as well, maybe not this year, but maybe next year, start to possibly, we might parse, especially if the Lightning miss the playoffs this year and they get off to a bad start next year. Obviously, when teams play bad, and especially a GM like Brees-Boss, who has not really had to deal with adversity all that much during his tenure here, he's going to do anything he can to preserve his job. And if the talk gets too loud about what needs to be done about this Lightning team, he's gonna sandbag Cooper. And that's not to say that Cooper's without blame. I mean, this team has really not improved on the ice at all. You still have high quality players on your team, and yet you're most nights, it looks like this team is, like I said, trying to reinvent fire or rediscover the wheel. And that's not something that really good hockey teams do if they want to go out there with aspirations of winning the cup. So really, there's no way to improve other than from within for this Lightning team. And that's the unfortunate truth right now that we have, which why, like I said before, if gun to my head, I don't believe that this Lightning team is going to make the playoffs. But you know what? There's a lot of hockey to be played from now until the end of the season, and hopefully the Lightning reignite a little bit of fire and are able to get on a run and put themselves in a conversation for not only a playoff spot, but hopefully a divisional playoff spot. So as always, go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. Also, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at DenkyDank, DenkyD8NK. Love hearing from all of you, and we'll be back tomorrow to discuss tonight's game against the Minnesota Wild. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you next one.